In the crime reporting year ended March 2024, the UK police recorded over 850,000 incidences of domestic abuse, and it's estimated that in the same time period, over 2.3 million people aged over 16 or older experienced domestic abuse. Today, we're going to be talking about the difficult issue of domestic abuse and how the law is failing those human victims of domestic abuse we've just talked about, but also the animal victims of domestic abuse that are often forgotten about as well. We're going to be talking to the people who are fighting for change to make sure that the law around domestic abuse properly protects animals and people too. And we're going to finish with one step that you can take to support both the human and the animal victims of domestic abuse. Welcome back to Animal Rights Explained. If you're new to the channel, we explain different elements of various animal protection laws, and we always finish with one step that you can take to be an animal advocate and improve our laws for the better for animals. Today, we're going to be talking about the challenging subject of domestic abuse of both humans and animals, and we appreciate that this is quite a triggering subject for some people. We're not going to be showing any images or any potential stories of domestic abuse. However, if that is a triggering issue for you, please take this as your proper warning of the content that is to come. We've put chapters in the video description down below, so if you want to skip through to different bits, then you can do really easily. That said, later I'm going to introduce Ruby's Law, an amazing initiative working to address the overlooked role and suffering of pets in a cycle of domestic abuse, whilst at the same time trying to provide survivors with the confidence to seek safety without fearing for the welfare of their beloved animals. Before we talk about Ruby's Law and the initiative for change for the better, let's talk a little bit more about domestic abuse and animals. Domestic abuse is sadly something which an unfortunate amount of people all around the world are subject to every single year. And in the United Kingdom, domestic abuse is legally defined by a law called the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. The Domestic Abuse Act defines domestic abuse as when a person A subjects another person B to different kinds of behaviour. And these types of behaviour can include various different things. There might be physical or sexual abuse, violent and threatening behaviour, controlling or coercive behaviour, economic abuse, psychological, emotional or other types of mental abuse. And it doesn't matter if this abuse is an isolated incident or actually occurs across a wider course of conduct. What the Domestic Abuse Act does not do is to state that domestic abuse includes threatening behaviour by a person towards another person's pets or perhaps other animals which they might care for. This creates an awkward gap in the law when somebody could be causing abuse or suffering to another person's animals, and that could cause them psychological harm and different types of trauma, and certainly suffering to the animals themselves. However, if a judge took a really narrow view of the legislation, it might not amount to domestic abuse under the law. The absence of animals in a definition of domestic abuse starts a wider trend of animals being missed by wider family law, which is there to protect people against abusive partners and relationships. Let's take non-molestation orders, for example. Non-molestation orders are injunctions issued by a court in respect of somebody, person A, who is associated with another person, person B. These orders specify behaviour, such as person A threatening person B, or might even limit that person's actions, such as preventing them from communicating with person B, maintaining a certain distance from that person at all times, and also may include person B's children. A person who breaches a non-molestation order as an injunction of the court can face up to 5 years in prison. The powers to grant non-molestation orders are fairly wide, and rightly so, in order to cover the amount of different situations they need to properly protect people. They do not, however, expressly apply to a person's animals. Now this means that someone who has been subject to a non-molestation order because they've been harassing their partner could go out and harass or threaten or harm that person's animals or pets or whatever they may look after, and under family law and that non-molestation order actually be a criminal offence. This is despite the fact that that behaviour and abuse towards those animals could very easily cause distress and turmoil and suffering to the human involved as well. Another part of family law where animals are not really protected alongside the families in which they live are occupation orders. Occupation orders are short-term intermediate orders which determine who in a relationship which has come into some kind of turmoil, might be domestic abuse or might be otherwise, but who gets to inhabit the house for a fixed intermediate period whilst wider resolutions are going on. Occupation orders are flexible. They can come with different attached conditions and obligations for the different parties involved, but one thing that occupation orders do not expressly address is what happens to the animals involved in the relationship which are living at the property concerned. This means that if a court took a really narrow view, that a judge might not feel that in the case of the domestic fallout and turmoil, that they don't have the power to grant who looks after animals which are housed within a domestic property at the centre of a dispute. This means that the animals might not be looked after by the people which they should do, and if there is abuse in the fallout which is causing an occupation order to be requested, those animals could actually stay with the property and unfortunately fall into the hands of whoever is not looking after them properly and might actually abuse them as they were abusing their partner before. So now we understand how in the legislation family law is falling behind and not properly protecting animals which get caught up within family law and domestic abuse issues. However, it's not just within the legislation that issues are, they're there in real life and reality as well. Research conducted by Refuge for Pets and Dogs Trust in 2021 found that in 90% of households experiencing domestic abuse where that animal was present, the animals were abused as well. And unfortunately, in 12% of cases, those animals went on to being sadly killed. Now, this animal abuse doesn't just impact the animals either. We're also thinking about the human victims here, because abuse towards animals has been shown to reduce the human victim's ability to reach out for further support and help against domestic abuse or whatever fallout might be happening. Research from Pause Protect and the Freedom Project showed that 42% of people suffering domestic abuse who had animals delayed leaving that abusive relationship because of fears for what would happen to their animals, and that 37% of people even had that as a factor for considering staying in those abusive relationships because of their fear for what would happen to their pets. The failure of the law to properly protect animals and human victims of domestic abuse, which then follows out into reality as we've just seen, hasn't gone unnoticed, however. And this is when I get the pleasure to introduce Ruby's Law. Ruby's Law is a fantastic initiative set up by Christina, named after her cat who is called Ruby. Christina is using her many years of experience arguing in the courts and representing her clients on issues of family law that we've just talked about to spearhead this campaign to reform the wider family law to better protect humans and animals. Ruby's Law is calling for several important changes to the relevant family law legislation. First, recognition in law that pets are part of the household affected by domestic abuse. Second, legal mechanisms to ensure the safety and welfare of pets in abusive situations. Thirdly, establishment of clear responsibilities for the courts and the judges involved when making decisions in respect of families regarding pets and animals too. Ruby's Law's proposals include some specific changes to the laws we've been talking about. For the domestic abuse 2021, there would be explicit reference to pet and animal abuse as a form of controlling or coercive behaviour, and ensure that domestic abuse protection orders can also cover harm or threats to pets as well. For non-molestation orders, these would be expanded to give the judge the ability to explicitly include pets in their ambit, meaning that they could prohibit harm or threats to pets as part of a non-molestation order. Finally, for occupation orders, provisions would be included to be able to decide who retains care of the pet and ensures the pet's safety when the temporary occupation of a family home is decided. If implemented, these proposed changes would have several important consequences and better protect human and animal victims in domestic abuse and fallout situations. In summary, Ruby's Law is a crucial step forward in protecting both the human and animal victims of domestic abuse and family law fallouts. By bringing pets within the sphere of domestic protections, we can ensure that no one has to choose between their own well-being and welfare and the protection and well-being of the pets and animals which they so love. And as I promised at the start of the video, if you've been touched by what we've been talking about today, here's a couple of easy steps that you can take to support the Ruby's Law campaign and make those changes. Linked in the video description down below is the change.org government petition for Ruby's Law, which encourages the government to make this actual law. You can easily sign this, it takes less than 2 minutes and every signature counts to help make a difference. If you want to go further than signing the petition, then what you can do is send a letter to your local MP, because to make this law reality, we need all the animals advocates in Parliament that we can get to push through the law. And really helpfully, Ruby's Law initiative has left a template for this ready for you to basically copy, have a review of it, make sure you're happy, and then send off to your Member of Parliament. And again, we'll leave a link to this letter in the video description down below. Thanks to you guys for watching this Animal Rights Explained video. Thank you also to Ruby's Law and Christina for all their expertise and hard work with the initiative and campaign. Please like if you've enjoyed the video, leave a comment down below with what you think we need to change to make sure that animals and humans are protected in the context of family conflicts, and subscribe to Animal Rights Explained for more content like this.